I will take them in alphabetical order of last name. So as I say your name, you can wave. Let me start with Dr. Eric Colleary, who is the Klein Curator of Theater and Performing Arts at the Harry Ransom Center, an international humanities research library, archive, and museum at the University of Texas in Austin. He's responsible for the interpretation, management, and growth of the center's performing arts collections. Most recently, with the Ransom Center, he launched the Theater 2020 project, an international effort to document how the events of this year have impacted theater professionals. Eric holds a PhD in theater historiography from the University of Minnesota, and his research has focused on the intersections of performance, archives, and sexual identities. Ciara Murphy serves as the Director of Strategic Research and Planning at the Public Theater in New York City. At the Public, Ciara leads all aspects of strategic and institutional planning. In addition to spearheading the Public's audience research and program evaluation initiatives, Ciara received her PhD in Theater and Performance Studies and PhD minor in History from Stanford. Alexandra Ripp is the director of Five College Dance, a collaboration between the dance departments / programs of Hampshire, Smith, Amherst, Mount Holyoke, and UMass Amherst. She previously served as the Mellon Postdoctoral Distill Fellow at UNC Chapel Hill / Carolina Performing Arts, as Ideas Program Manager at the International Festival of Arts and Ideas, and as Associate Editor at Theater Magazine. Her doctoral research focused on contemporary Chilean theater and memory politics, and she continues to translate Chilean theater and is co-editing and translating for the e-journal Imagined Theater's forthcoming edition. She holds an MFA and DFA from Yale School of Drama. Mackenzie Sullivan is the Director for Graduate Student Career Services for the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Minnesota, where she develops career programming for students and departments. She also coaches individual graduate students through career exploration and search processes. Prior to her work with the University of Minnesota, she directed the Social Impact and Sustainability Careers segment at Duke's School of Business, helping socially minded MBA students find employment in areas such as impact investing, social enterprise, nonprofits, and corporate sustainability. She has a passion for helping students, regardless of discipline or degree, find work that is personally meaningful, contributes to the greater good, and provides a sustainable life. So I think as an introductory bit, some of you may know that one of my side research projects is tracing the career trajectories of every PhD in theater and performance studies produced by a school within the United States over the course of this decade. From 2011 to 2019, there have been 835 PhDs / DFAs produced by programs inside of the United States. Now, of those 835 PhDs, 324 of them hold tenure track gigs, or about 38.8%. 218 of them, or 26.11%, are working primarily in contingent academic positions. Those could range from full-time lecturers that are not in the tenure track to adjuncts. And the remainder are working outside of the professoriate. So that means just around 40% of PhDs produced by the field are working outside of the professoriate. And of those PhDs, a substantive number are working both in administrative and staff roles at colleges and universities, or with professional theaters around the country in a number of positions ranging from full-time staff positions to artistic freelance positions. So I thought for this panel, I would invite Alex, Eric, Ciara, and Mackenzie to talk about their experience and knowledge bases, and to open themselves up for questions and comments from all of you. Uh, if you have a question, you can type it in the chat and we can get to it when we get to the Q&A part. We'll also open up space for you to ask questions via video chat in just a moment. But I'd like to start by asking Alex, Ciara, and Eric if they can talk about their personal career trajectories from their PhD programs to the work that they are in presently. And then after that, I'd like to ask Mackenzie if there are things that she has found in her position that if there are trajectories that she has found in her position that seem to be trajectories that are particularly prominent for PhDs in the humanities. Eric, again, taking things in alphabetical order, why don't you start us off?
As you mentioned, I got my PhD at the University of Minnesota. While I was there working on the PhD, I also got a doctoral minor in museum studies, which was incredibly helpful. So the field that I work in is called the GLAM field, the galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. With those courses at the University of Minnesota, one of the course assignments was to imagine building an exhibit out of a collection that was available in town. And so I had chosen the Treader Collection for LGBT Studies, which is an amazing archive of LGBT studies. That exhibit ended up, it was just an imagined exhibit, but it was something that they were really interested in moving forward with. It was on the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. With that, I ended up getting more involved with the Treader Collection. I started volunteering with them. The volunteering moved into a paid processing gig over the summer. And I ended up writing my dissertation a lot on LGBT archives in the United States and how they perform identity. So the work in the archive became a focus of my research. Then I graduated and I worked for a while, 2 years at a small liberal arts college in St. Paul, Minnesota. And then this job opened up at the Ransom Center and I applied for that. And I've been here now for about 6 years. So yeah, that's been my journey, I guess, this far.
Great. Ciara, go ahead, please.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm just thrilled to get to talk about this subject a lot because I began in my PhD program at Stanford. It was there that I decided that I wanted to pursue a non-academic career. And much like Eric, it was by engaging in a PhD minor program, like stepping outside my own discipline and being really engaged with other ways of thinking. And my minor was in history of science and technology. And it was just thrilling to be in an environment that was so multidisciplinary in that regard. But it was in doing my PhD work, really it was my teaching experience that formed the pivot for me. I loved being in the classroom. It was my passion, and that's where everything sort of lit on fire for me. And I realized that the writing part of the profession was just not for me. I found it really isolating. I enjoyed the work, but it wasn't thrilling for me in the same way that those interactions in the theater or in the classroom were. And one of the sort of key experiences that I had there was that at that time at Stanford, we had a real pipeline issue in the undergraduate program, which is we just weren't attracting or graduating enough majors. So one of the tasks I had was in developing a new entry-level pipeline class with one of our master teaching artists. And over the course of about 2 years, that program like exponentially boosted the number of undergraduates we had. And that was what I wanted my research to do. I wanted to be able to research a problem, triad solutions, and just sort of pursue best practices. And I really thought that the best place to do that was not within the academy, but outside. I was fortunate enough the year after I graduated, when I was on the market, that ACLS had created a public that places and social sciences in not-for-profit and government roles. And it was there that I found my foothold at the Public Theatre. They had a postdoctoral position there that was a strategy role. And I cannot sing the praises of ACLS and the Public Fellows competition like more loudly. I will rave all day long about them to anybody who wants to listen, because ASTLS is staffed by PhDs. So these are folks who've sort of stepped into academic adjacent roles. They are walking their talk, and we're an incredible support in that transition. And I think the transitions can be hard. We'll get to that later, but they recognized the humanities skill set. They were able to coach and guide about how to match that skill set to new work environments. And all of that is just incredibly and fundamentally important. If there are students in the session, and I'm so glad to see that there are faculty members here, that investment is incredible as well. And certainly I didn't experience much of that when I was a graduate student in non-academic career paths. But I will say that one of my biggest champions and most important intersections as a grad student in making the pivot was with the Graduate Career Center, especially one-on-one long-term mentorship with a graduate career counselor there, who was used to seeing all types of job materials, navigating job postings in a way that I wasn't. The pro seminars that we had were fully based on the academic job model and the academic job material. So I felt really adept at that, but like, you know, I could write an academic CV, you know, in my sleep, but didn't know the first thing about like adapting that to a different kind of workplace, or the fact that nobody wants to see your list of publications or full teaching resume, right? So that was sort of my path from postdoc to full-time role at the Public Theatre, where I still am.
Great, thank you. Alex, go ahead, please.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Nellie, for putting this together. Glad to be here. So I am maybe a little bit different in that I did an MFA and then a DFA at Yale. So I came in already in the School of Drama. So I came in already not being sure if I wanted to be an academic. And that was the only place I applied because I knew that I wanted the opportunity to pursue both working in the theater more practically as a dramaturg, and also exploring the possibility of academic research. And I had come in knowing I was interested in Latin American work, which I had looked at in undergrad. So I was already on the fence, and Yale sort of encourages that. So by the time I got to the end of my MFA, I felt pretty clear that I had an academic research project, but I had already started also working, and this might, I mean, I wasn't doing a minor, but I sort of similar to Eric and Ciara, found something that wasn't only my research and coursework per se that I had found an affinity with, and that was working at the the International Festival of Arts and Ideas in New Haven. So that was sort of like a recurring summer gig for people to do company management work. And, you know, I started at the bottom of the totem pole, like carrying Mark Morris's bags or whatever. And I found a mentor there who was the programming director and curator. And I was really interested in that work. So I stayed there every summer, and I worked there for 5 summers and eventually started curating the ideas part, which was all the symposia and lectures and discussions that surrounded and supported the artistic presentations. And this was an annual summer festival in New Haven that took place on Yale's campus, but also public space and other locations. So that was sort of a recurring thing throughout my doctoral research, which was on Chilean theater. And I was working also at Theater Magazine. So I had these sort of other, I was interested sort of in curation, in international work, in translating, which I started to do while I was at Yale. And I found myself noticing my inclination to work with other people. I liked teaching as well. I really liked working at the festival. I liked being in an office. I liked working in a team, and I liked writing, but I didn't like academic writing that much. And I found, I'm pretty self-motivated, but I've always struggled with you know, with the work and the timeline of academic writing. So I found I was cognizant of those changes within myself. And I never seriously considered an academic teaching position. So I applied to sort of, the academy and the community and the arts. Those are that's sort of the triangle I identified as being interested in, and it's how did those three things work together. And I ended up getting a postdoc at Carolina Performing Arts. It was a postdoc that they housed, that's a major presenting organization within UNC Chapel Hill. So it was a very unusual postdoc. I had to find my own department. I taught in American Studies. It was super unclear on the academic side, and I didn't really have an advisor or anything like that. But I was tasked with running a long-term residency program that brought in four artists of different disciplines for 2 to 3 years to work with faculty. And if you've run a grant program, you know that they're all ideas. So you have to actually make it a thing. And negotiating, and so the artists were Toshi Regan, who is a musician and works a lot at the Public, Jonah Beaucaire, who's a dancer and choreographer, Robin Frohart, who is a puppeteer and theater maker, and Abigail Washburn, who's a banjo player. So they were trying to define collaborative research projects with faculty, and that sort of began to spill out into the community, and I was sort of holding it all together and managing the budget and reporting back to Mellon. And so that was sort of that triangle I was craving, which I really liked. And then I got brought in at Five College Dance, and my position is to basically, it's another sort of, I'll get to this later, I sort of see it all as a kind of translation. But between 5 very different schools, very different dance programs that have worked together for 40 years, but I've taken on a new staff position as a director that used to be a half-time faculty chair. So with that comes a lot of, I think, like more strategic planning and reassessment and basically realignment than maybe they had anticipated. But I have been doing a lot of work trying to clarify mission and vision and goals. This program has been really successful and productive for 40 years, but it's sort of, as many programs do, you know, as the personnel changes, as the priorities change, as different campuses, pedagogical and financial realities shift, all these things need to be sort of brought back into alignment, and everything needs to be more deliberate. So I'm sort of in charge of, you know, initiating new directions always with the faculty, never by myself, new partnerships, projects, but also helping them sort of recrystallize what it is that they're doing and how they work together. And it's actually way more facilitation and governance than I thought. So
thank you.
That's my story.
Mackenzie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I want to just echo a couple things. My background is not in the world of academia necessarily. It's in the world of higher education, but the side of helping people figure out what they want to do and get jobs. And about 9 months into my job, I had an alum come to me and say, I'm really interested in this ACLS Mellon Fellows program. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but let's look it up. And she ended up I worked with her, she ended up getting the fellowship, and it's been amazing for her. I think she's going to be done maybe next spring. But it was an absolutely amazing experience for her, and I think it's going to launch her in some really good directions. And I know the question that I was asked to talk about was, what are the paths that humanities majors, so not necessarily just theater arts, students are landing in when they exit the academy. We have also been collecting, we're working on a big project right now within the College of Liberal Arts to collect that kind of data and figure out where people are going. And I think that's universally true now across most universities. We didn't used to do much about this, but I think people are really realizing it's important. And so when you look sort of nationally, and this is echoed at our own institution, historically you see folks going to work at museums, historical societies, nonprofits in general, public administration to some degree, and consulting. I would say people start their own consultancy sometimes, or they will join consultancies. Increasingly, entrepreneurship, people are starting their own thing. And lately we're seeing a move to folks translating their skills into the tech sector. And I think that a lot of this, the change that we've seen very recently, and I'm talking about like last 6 months recently, is kind of where we're seeing the economy right now. For folks who work in the nonprofit sector, I'm sure you all know, right, grants are tough right now. It's hard to get money. And so I think increasingly students are trying to figure out, where might I go that there are jobs right now? And so I suspect that we're going to see a change in the next year or two of where people are going merely to make a wage that they can subsist on right now, and then pivoting those skills back into something they maybe care a little bit more about. But certainly, I sat in on a webinar by a woman named Maren Wood, who I know you all have brought in from beyond the Professoriate. And, you know, what she said, and I think this is really true, is, you know, there's no one career path for PhDs. There's no like magic list of this is what folks do from the humanities. Kind of the world is your oyster, which is a little bit of a problem. But what I would also say is sometimes there's some additional skills that need to be added into the mix for folks to be successful. And, you know, trying to figure out right now, what is the thing that people, you're always going to make some compromises in your next position, and what's the thing you're willing to compromise on right now in a tough economy versus things you're not willing to compromise on. And so one of the things I always encourage students to look into as you're trying to sort of mirror, how do I make a living wage in my life? How do I have some sort of mission and feel like I'm contributing positively to society? You know, maybe you don't want to go work for Amazon. People have different opinions about Amazon, but maybe you're like, I don't want to go work for a big corporation like that. There are things called benefit corporations, social enterprises, which is basically the concept of using the tools of the private sector, venture capital. So you're not relying on grants, but you are doing good things. And so many people will look at these organizations and think that they're nonprofits, and they're actually structured in a for-profit model. And for-profit, nonprofit, it's merely a tax status, right? It doesn't say anything about mission, but I'm encouraging folks to look into those kinds of things, because grant money is tough to come by for nonprofits right now, even though that's what I often hear people are wanting to do. And so to look to this kind of fourth sector that maybe has a little bit more funding right now, but you will still get to engage in a mission. And so that's the thing I've been talking to my students about lately, because I always want to be realistic about where we are in the economy, knowing that things will change. But the minute you're out there working, you're developing skills that you can always use to pivot to. I think that's it, unless there was some part of that question that I didn't answer.
No, I think that's great. And that'll help us transition a little bit into the next question I have for everybody. So I think Ciara touched on this in her initial comment, but one of the things I hear most frequently from graduate students who I work with, be they at Tufts or at other places, is that they may be interested in careers beyond the professoriate, but they don't really know how to make their skills legible to potential employers beyond the professoriate. You know, they may have been taught how to write a CV or put together conference abstracts, but don't necessarily know how to turn that into a resume, or how a cover letter for a position outside of the professoriate might be different from a cover letter for an assistant professor position. Similarly, like how do you legibly demonstrate the skills that you have, either skills that you've brought with you into your PhD program, or skills that you've accumulated along the way in ways that might read clearly to employers outside of the professoriate? I think this is the big question, and perhaps the big mental block for many PhD DFA students who are interested in careers beyond the professoriate, but don't quite know how to make that first step. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on that. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order this time. So Mackenzie, if you wouldn't mind starting off.
Yeah, sure. I think that absolutely can be a huge issue, the language translation issue. And so, you know, one of the things I want you to remember is, for students out there, and even faculty who are trying to refer students, many universities now have career services folks who are working with PhD students. That was not true, I don't even know. I mean, my position was literally created 2 years ago. So when Eric was there, there was nobody. But I think increasingly this is being recognized as a really important function. And so when you are looking to translate your skills, if you go into your career services office, that's what people do. Many folks come from a different world than you do and can help you make that language translation. And so, you know, short of that, which I think is, you know, it's a free resource for all students, so go on in and use it. I think there's other ways to think about doing that. And so I am a big fan of going on big job aggregator websites or using your local Handshake account that many people have on campus and just scrolling through job postings and saying, like, that looks interesting. What is the language they're using? If you don't know what it is, if they're saying, you know, what's marketing? I don't know what that is. Do I have that skill? You can Google it and say, like, what is it that they're trying to figure out there? Because when you, it's literally like learning a different language depending on the type of industry and field you're trying to go into. But you can learn an awful lot by going on the web and Googling what terms mean. And then I think it's a matter of people sitting down, and this can be done. I would recommend doing it with somebody outside of your normal circle of academia and saying, this is what I do, right? When I am writing my dissertation, here is what I'm doing. And to break it down into kind of a skills mechanism. And if somebody says, what is that? Or tell me more, give me more detail about that, because we're trying to get very concrete. Not only if you write, that's fine, but what are you writing about? What's the purpose of your writing? You know, is it technical writing? What's your audience? How do you do it? And so I think it's often a matter of doing some Googling around, reading some job postings, and then you developing your list of skills and translating it into that language. And it takes a while. It takes a while to learn another language. When I started at the University of Minnesota, I spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out some of the things the students would come in and say to me. I'm like, I don't know what that is, right? I know what the industry term for that is, but like, is this what you're saying? And so I think there is a lot of language translation that needs to take place, and it often helps to work with somebody who is not in your field or not in academia. The other thing that I think that's really important particularly for folks in the humanities is to realize that there certainly are going to be skills that you are learning that you are just going to have to figure out how to name through some work. I also think that there are some skills that you may learn in some programs and not in other, but everything that falls within what I would call the digital realm right now is super important. You know, can you work a basic Excel spreadsheet? Do you know maybe a tiny bit about Python? You know, can you write up a website if you need to? Budgeting, I know somebody managed budgeting. Can you get some experience budgeting? Can you work your experience, you know, with your grants and managing your grants into budgeting language? And so I think it's important sometimes to realize there could be skills, not necessarily, but there could be skills outside of your coursework that you might want to think about learning a little bit. And my last word of caution is, when I say that, I do not mean going out and getting another degree or a certification necessarily. I often will have students say, like, I'm going to do this certification in something. And I'm like, do not pay money to do that. There's so much free training. The possible only exceptions that I would say is maybe project management. That certificate right now seems to be kind of valued in the workplace, although I'd think really carefully about it. You may not need it. And sometimes folks who just want to make a living will go do a coding boot camp. That can be worth it, but the rest of the certifications, don't do them. They're not valued in the workplace right now, and you often can get the better training just by doing it online. So.
Thank you. Alex, go ahead, please.
So my thoughts are less kind of like resume nuts and boltsy and more about like framing and telling your story. As I mentioned, I sort of ended up, I just want to say Mackenzie's right. There's so much on the internet that I think that you can feel like you don't have anything, but there's so much out there, and you don't need like someone to give you an A and a certification. But back to the telling your story. So I think because I was a translator, or because I am a translator, and because I was working between all of these different realms and trying to unite them and or collaborate with them, I sort of framed everything I was doing as translation, and that gave me like a coherent narrative and a way to, especially in the kinds of work I was looking at that was specifically about like okay, these campuses are working together. How do I translate their needs to one another? How do I translate that to upper admin and back down? That was a really powerful, you know, hook for me. And so, and I've talked to other folks about that who are interested in these jobs. And I think like often you have the material to use, but you just, all you can see is like lack and what you don't have. But there is a positive way of spinning it that reads to other sectors. I think that also I leveraged a lot what my dramaturgy training was. There's a lot of transferable skills there that people have been very interested in. Basically, it's kind of like consulting in some ways. You know, you're helping people articulate their ideas, asking good questions, giving them feedback, being both inside and outside, doing research when necessary, being flexible to what the project is, thinking about structure and intention. Those are all things that are super, super applicable to most jobs. I do think budgets is a really good thing. I mean, to practice in some way, and I did that a little bit when I was working at Arts and Ideas, but that's a thing that I continually struggle with a little bit. I wish I had started that earlier. And then I think the other thing that I would say is with alt-AC jobs, being able to understand the academy, even if you're not a professor, using your experience as a teacher, as a student, as proof for that you have skills that you can, and a knowledge base that you can bring to those staff positions is really crucial. And the last thing I'll say is that even in academic institutions, I have noticed that there can be the assumption that as a PhD, you don't know how to do practical things. So I sort of like recognized that early and was like prepared to accept that and sort of like not take it personally, but also offer constructive pushback to that. So, but my main thing is about the framing and the telling of your own story.
Great. Ciara, go ahead, please.
Yeah, it's definitely a narrative challenge, right? And this is where actually PhDs in humanities are so primed to be great at this, which is adapting these skill sets. And so much of it is a question of confidence about how you center your own narrative, how you can adapt to different language, and also about knowing who your reader is. So if you are writing for a non-academic audience or in another job sector, like try your darndest to get somebody from that field to read your work, because they will reflect back to you some of the challenges or some of the mismatches. But as Alex was saying, a lot of the challenges are common across the board. People are trying to grow things that aren't growing. They are trying to reduce expenses in places that are expensive. You know, these are basic themes that you see coming up again and again. And I think this is where sort of trialing these skills becomes really important. I do think if I were to go back to the PhD experience that I had and do it over, I would definitely try to take more classes outside of my discipline, especially in just things that would broadly be useful in any career, right? Data visualization. It's always great to have good presentation skills, no matter what field of work you're in. Developing financial acumen. You cannot manage anything without budget skills. You just can't. You will never get to be the leader of an organization if you don't have that background. And you know, on a personal level too, it's just great for life to be able to manage money, to be able to read the budget sheet. It gives you a different kind of seat at the table when you can navigate that sort of information. What else do I have on my list? Excel. Excel is pretty basic, and this can be great just when you're a PhD student managing your own sources and information, but it's often overlooked and it's really basic, but it is such an incredible and flexible tool, and it's so simple. But it wasn't something that was embedded in, you know, I was a theater student all the way through my third level career, so from undergraduate all the way through, and it was just something I never learned until I left my PhD program. I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but that investment of time was totally worth it. And I wish I'd had it as a PhD student, just because it's a great tool. And again, anything in the digital arena can be super helpful, whether it's building websites, whether it's coding, but definitely the financial components of this are really important. Talking to other PhDs who've made the transition can help you also frame your narrative. One of the biggest champions I ever had, and it was through an ASTR resource, a couple of years ago, ASTR was publishing interviews with folks who had gone into non-academic careers. And it was in one of those newsletters that I found Lauren Mayer, who is now president of operations at NPR, but had made the transition from her PhD at Northwestern into a strategy role at NPR. So in my early days at the Public, when I was really lost and not understanding how to turn up in the kind of work that they wanted me to do, because they seemed to think that a PhD was an MBA, which it is not. It was talking to Lauren that gave me perspective, and it was Lauren who said, "Oh, I've been in your shoes. Don't worry." So when you talk to artists, think about it as cultivating student work. So you want to raise the stakes with them. You want to understand how to shape their work, turn up with the same kind of critical generosity that you would in a classroom. And it was really empowering to hear someone who was a bit further along in their career reflect back to me all of the strengths I didn't know that I had in that arena. So I would just say developing those kinds of conversations and creating those mentorship opportunities is essential.
Eric, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thinking about this, I was looking back over the job application that I applied for when I got here, and they wanted both a PhD and an MLIS degree. So it's 2 terminal degrees, one in the humanities and one in library science and information technologies. And nobody does that. Why would you do that? And I think they realized that. So that was a sort of a, don't self-select yourself out of the applications, to maybe think about how you can create that narrative to show that you actually maybe have the skills, even if you don't have a certificate or the degree. Definitely, I would agree with what Mackenzie was saying about not spending a lot of money on certifications or additional degrees. Oftentimes it's the experience and the networking that really is what gets people at an interview. So a job like this, they're looking at, people who can do exhibits, education, programming, who can assist researchers, who try to reach new audiences with the collections. They can do budgets, they can do grant writing. So thinking about the work that I've been doing in theater already, it made sense to me, but it did take some translation into, explaining how storytelling or creating a performance is really similar to creating an exhibit, for example. It's about creating a narrative through line and taking people on a journey and having them come away with some sort of an experience. I had done some business communications work too while I was working on my PhD as a way of financially supporting myself during the PhD. That kind of work also was really helpful in being able to show that I could do grant writing, that I understood budgets. Theater people tend to be really project management oriented. They're really good at being able to sort of structure their time and being able to sort of plan things out, in detail to make sure that by the performance date you are ready to open. That is something that maybe folks in different fields don't quite get unless you sort of break that down for them in a way that they'll understand. I don't have a library degree, and I did do some library work while I was at the University of Minnesota, but not in any sort of official capacity as an archivist or as anybody who was formally trained. But what I can do and what I find now in my position is that there are projects that come up with the archival team. Things like right now we're working on Wikidata, which is this massive international project with the Wiki Foundation to create data of theaters, buildings, individuals, organizations, and try to sort of create structured data that links all these things together. In the field of theater and all these theater topics, I can help point them to those really obscure 19th century encyclopedias that maybe nobody knows about anymore, that have like the biographical data that can be mined for that. So what I can offer is that sort of research background. But I would echo also what several of you have also mentioned about having background in coding, database work, Python, data visualization, Omeka, collection management systems, anything like that. The digital humanities is a huge and growing field, and not just within the academy, but outside the academy too. If there's ways of incorporating the digital humanities into your own research, that is a way that you can leverage some of the technology that people are looking for right now. There are a lot of people out there who can do coding and a lot of people who can do Python, but not a lot of people who can do that and have a foundation in the humanities and understand how they can work together. And that is huge. There's such a need. I can't begin to tell you. And so I would also say that even if you're not on the job market this year, it is certainly really helpful to look at job postings. If you don't know where to find those job postings, reach out to people in the field and ask them where their institutions tend to post their stuff. When jobs do come open in the GLAM professions, that tends to be the National Council of Public History, the American Alliance of Museums, Society of American Archivists, places where people in my field, that's where actually my institution was posting this job announcement, and they failed their first search because they couldn't attract, nobody with a background in performance or the humanities was paying attention to those listservs. And think, there might be the job that you're really going for, the field that you're really interested in. Talk to people in those fields, because sometimes there are jobs that are beyond what may be visible. I didn't really think about a job necessarily as a curator in performing arts as a possibility. But within that field too, there's all the people who work in libraries and archives. There's education directors, there's outreach directors. There are, in some cases at museums, there's directors of research who manage publications. There's also in the field, we work a lot with professional booksellers who are so eager to work with people who know how to do research in the humanities and who can write well. There's lots of jobs in that area. So talk to people in the field, and I'm certainly always open to having conversations with folks who are interested. And later I can put my contact in the chat window.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that has come up in this round of questioning is lots of the panelists noting to talk to other people, to form connections of networking, connections of mentorship. This echoes conversations that my colleagues and I had in 2018. I hosted a consortium for PhD program directors in theater and performance studies at Tufts, and many of the directors of the PhD theater programs in the US attended. And there, Maren Wood, who Mackenzie has referenced, and several other alt-ac career experts really highlighted and emphasized the importance of networking and mentorship. But again, I think it's another instance where PhD DFA students may hear that networking and mentorship are important, but don't necessarily know how to begin going about creating and formulating those networks and alliances. So I'm wondering if you all could speak to your own strategies for forming networks, for finding mentors and colleagues and collaborators who helped you think through some of the challenges that you face both applying to and working in your current positions, so that the people listening live and recording later can have some strategies going forward. Let's move outside of the structure of alphabetical order. I'll just call from someone in the middle now. Alex, do you mind starting us off on this?
Sure. So I guess, well, I just wanted to say that one of the best networking experiences I had in terms of directly linking to the job that I got was at ASTR. So I went to the alt-ac panel, and the person who had the postdoc at Carolina Performing Arts before me was at that panel, and I was like, that sounds amazing. And I got his contact, and he's still a friend, and he was part of my search committee and all that. So that was a clear, obvious connection. And another woman had a Mellon job that when she left it, she emailed me on the panel, and I had connected with her too. And she emailed me and said, would you be interested? I wasn't done with my dissertation at that point, but that was very, very an effective networking. So those people are at ASTR, so you can hunt them out like we are. I guess my mentors had been at Arts and Ideas, the curator I mentioned. I sort of identified her as a mentor. She's still my mentor, Kathy Edwards, and she now runs New England Foundation of the Arts. I've never I mean, it's also a question of personalities. I like to email people for informational interviews when I find somebody that I'm like, your job sounds really interesting. I don't think I knew I was doing it when I was doing it, that I was actually networking. I was just really interested in and I would reach out and say, this sounds really great. I'm a PhD student. I'd love to know more about what you do. And so I'm a big fan of informational interviews. People are really generous with their time. They also love to talk about themselves. And in the festival journal world, and being near New York for my PhD, I just sort of, I don't know, maybe that's my personality, but I'm not shy about asking for time, and I encourage the younger folks that I mentor to do the same. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I was genuinely interested and I wasn't trying to get a job. And I think that's the best time to talk to people, is when there's actually no job to be discussed and you're just planting your name and hopefully impressing somebody with your smart questions. But yeah, I didn't have a great strategy for it, but I think it's my personality to just be attuned to different fields and different people doing that work and asking for their time. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Mackenzie, if you wouldn't mind.
What Alex said, I mean, I think that sometimes people worry they have to develop some grand networking plan strategy, or, you know, everyone I reach out to is going to become a really good mentor to me and I'll talk to them multiple times. And I really think that the best networking skill is just pure curiosity. And that you don't have to start big. You start with one person. So if there's any students on this call, to reach out to one of the panelists, because the world also tends to be a fairly small place within certain groupings. And so, you know, Alex probably knows Eric, knows Ciara, like people know each other. And so if I'm talking to Alex and she's saying, well, you know, what I'm doing isn't really what you want to do, but I do know somebody who does something sort of similar, that will happen a fair bit too. And like, so ditto on the best time to start reaching out to people is not when you need a job. It's when you can genuinely reach out and be curious about what somebody does. And that's when people are very generous with their time, because people really do like to talk about themselves. They do like to talk about their jobs. And, you know, particularly if they have a PhD, they've been through what you're going through now as a student. You know, it will be, you know, people want to help when they've like, I've been there before. And so I wouldn't worry too much about the exact person even you're reaching out to. If you're like, I don't know where to start, you know, I don't know, would I like Alex's job or not? I don't know. But if you connect with one person, ask some really good questions, you're going to learn a lot and you're going to start building that network. And so, and I've noticed this working a lot with my PhD students, is that people want to have like an exact formula or a plan or like the right way of doing it. And there isn't something like that. The right way to do it is to do it, just get started. Like, you're going to get better at learning how to ask questions, like what's going to get you the information, but start with one person, be curious. That's what it is. You're not selling yourself in an informational interview. You are trying to learn about what they do. And if you approach people with that sense of curiosity, people are very generous with their time. And do it now, because when you don't need a job, you can be purely curious and it will lead to things down the road. It's a leap of faith. People say that sounds like a huge leap of faith. Shouldn't I just get on job boards and apply? And I'm like, nope. 90% of the folks that I've worked with have gotten jobs through this mechanism. And I'm not saying they may not have eventually ended up applying and submitting a resume, but the resume was kind of an afterthought, right? Because they'd already made this great network. And by the time they submitted that resume, they knew they were probably at least going to get an interview. So start early, don't worry about having a great strategy, and be curious.
Great, thank you. Eric, if you wouldn't mind.
So many great bits of advice. I remember just feeling like I was in a bubble of academia when I was in graduate school, and that is a hard thing to break out of. And it's good to sort of really be intentional about that while you're there. Don't be afraid to reach out to people randomly. I did actually have a mentor when I was an undergrad at Ohio State who, in a professional aspects class who suggested a formula for networking, which was to create a spreadsheet, and on one column, people you know really well and you can ask for anything, people who you know sort of well, but maybe not as well as you would like to. And then people you know of, but want to know better. And the idea is that you take everybody in the right-hand column and eventually work their way over to the left, which seemed very formulaic and not terribly successful, but an interesting strategy. I do want to stress that it really isn't about trying to sense of curiosity. It's so people will be so thrilled to talk with you. Yeah, cast a wide net. I'd also say too, just not to be afraid of alt academia, which is a term that I actually really sort of chafe against, because I don't think of what I do as being an alternative to academia. It's still within it. It's just needing to sort of expand the idea of what academia is. So don't let that stop you from thinking like, you know, just because I'm not on this career trajectory that looks exactly like the mentors in my program, that you're somehow doing something wrong. It's not the case at all. So get out there, break the bubble.
Great. Ciara, go ahead, please.
Thank you. And I totally +1 on that, Eric. Alternative academia is something we need to retire, I think. I think this is all, I'll just sort of double down and say a couple of additive things, because I agree with all of this. I'll say with informational interviewing, if you're concerned about people's time, just don't ask for a lot of it. Like, make the barrier really low. It can be like a 15 or 20-minute conversation, and people are so kind, they will respond. So nobody should be self-conscious about that. I will say that I am a fly student. I was first generation low income. So to me, networking and a lot of professionalization felt really mystifying. And the mentorship really counts there. So I'm really speaking to faculty when I say this. My wonderful mentor, Peggy Phelan, when I shared with her my concerns about networking, because I'm not great at a conference, I'm an introvert. So I just imagined like a canapé in one sweaty hand, a drink in another, shaking, talking to one of these academic stars, and it seemed awful. And she said, "Dear, but you love making friends." And it just changed everything for me. Just her saying or framing networking as making friends made all the difference for me in terms of how I turned up in a more relaxed way and how I encountered people that I felt were really fancy. And it unlocked a lot for me. So I would just say, just be really aware of where your students are coming from and their background, so that for every part of this, it doesn't feel so mystifying, because that can create a huge psychological shift, which can unlock as well. And yes, I think it's all money in the bank, right? Which is like, you don't want to draw credit on a relationship you don't have. So really make those investments at a time when you need nothing, because honestly, it's the people who, you know, I went out for coffee 2 or 3 times who might call me up and say, "I'm applying for a job at New York Theater Workshop. Can you tell me what you know about those folks who might be reading my application, etc." That's the thing that motivates me to pick up the phone and be like, you're looking for, and help them when they need that help later on.